Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Well, news in town is that the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, is on the final leg of his stewardship as Nigeria's chief electoral umpire after holding the reign of leadership at the commission for the past 10 years. What was he? Good cop, bad cop? I'm sure a lot of Nigerians will have a lot to say about the man who oversaw two general elections in 2019 and 2023. Well, for a bit of an insight, we're now being joined by Dr. Barnabas, Associate Professor of Political Criminology and Subdean Faculty of Management and Social Sciences at Cosmopolitan University. Dr. Barnabas, thank you so much for joining us on the morning show. So, good cop or bad cop, your assessment of Professor Mahmoud Yakubu's tenure as the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission from the perspective of how we saw elections for 2019 and 2023. What would your assessment be?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Well, if anyone is to objectively assess the performances of Professor Mahmoud in the past 10 years, you do so with a lot of, figures. I mean, you have to use facts to assess him. In terms of the legal frameworks that would have enabled a free and fair election, we would give that to him. When he came on board, he pushed for the digitalization of most of the processes, in terms of ensuring that the identity of voters, the accreditation of voters and all are in place. So if you look at that, you would rate him, well. But the outcome of our elections under Mahmoud, Yakubu Mahmoud has been far beyond expectation. I mean, in terms of having failed to meet the expectations of Nigerians. I think himself, if he had to rate himself in the past 10 years, he would agree that he may not have met, his expectations in terms of, the quality of elections that have been conducted. INEC under Mahmoud Jaga seemed to have been influenced or captured by politicians to the extent that in some cases, INEC had come to say, well, you cannot just blame INEC for the failures that we see with our elections, that you must also evaluate or, consider the very unpleasant political behaviors of our political actors. And so to that extent, you will understand that the Nigerian political environment is very turbulent, filled with a lot of Machiavellian, activities, pressures, ungodly, demagogic political activities that undermine the good intentions of even the umpire and some of the actors who may have come in with good intentions, but if you want to talk about the outcome, as a lecturer, I mark people based on what they have written, not based on what they may claim to know and all. So Mahmoud is living, with very unpleasant record. That's a fact.
All right, Professor Barnabas, when you say that Professor Mahmoud is living with unpleasant records, which areas do you think that he has within his purview as the chairman of INEC? Which area do you think that you will consider that he has failed so that his successor can watch out for those areas? Will they include the three key areas where people are at least saying that, he made useful changes? In the area of beavers, for example, in the area of IREV, and also in the area of delineation of many of the polling constituencies, thereby, bringing more people on board. And also in terms of registration and distribution of voters' card. Many people tend to think that those are success areas. Are they also part of his failures? And what will you have the next person do so as not to repeat the errors and the mistakes and the failures, in your own words, of Professor Yakubu?
Yeah, like I said, if you assess Professor Mahmoud in the context of the reforms that he brought to INEC in terms of the technology, application of technology in trying to ensure that people who are to vote are actually the people who will be present to vote, you will give him, kudos. Haven't done well in that area. But all this technology that he has brought into INEC, they have not delivered the desired outcome in terms of ensuring that votes count, and that's a major failure. You cannot say because someone has textbook to read, because someone attends class, and on the day of exam, the person fails to write well, and so the person should be considered and passed on the basis of having attended classes and having read his books and all. In terms of outcome, counting of votes, obeying the rules that INEC itself has set, INEC failed totally. And the examples are there. I mean, the recent one where we can look back at is the one in Kogi State, where people manufactured votes. In fact, INEC, by its own guidelines, said that they were not going to announce anybody. Unfortunately, in the night, those INEC commissioners and their representatives went ahead to announce results that were fictitious, results that were manufactured by politicians. So, if the new INEC chairman, I hope that he comes and obey the rules that INEC has set. If INEC follows its guidelines, elections in Nigeria will be very, very good. If INEC follows its own rules in terms of what the criteria that elections must meet before the winners are announced, then you will see that people will have trust in INEC. One of the greatest undoing of Mahmoud's INEC is the fact that there is total, complete erosion of confidence in our electoral processes and even outcomes. And that's a major, undoing of his tenure, because both local and international observers, have, totally disagreed with the elections that Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, have conducted in the last 10 years. And so if you assess him on that, you know that he has done very badly in terms of conducting elections, in terms of announcing results, and then, very importantly, in terms of obeying its own rules and guidelines for conducting credible elections. Professor Mahmoud had the luxury of, a lot of resources available to him, made available by the Nigerian state for him to conduct free and fair elections. But what we saw on the days of elections that were conducted by him was that they disregarded those processes, made nonsense of those technologies, and reverted back to the Nigerian way of doing things. And then they announce people and tell them to go to court, with the hope that they go to court and then the courts will have their way in line with whatever, arguments that are presented to them. So the incoming INEC chairman should know that that word, INEC, the I there is independent. It must be independent. It must not be seen to be under the influence of the Nigerian political class. For instance, under Mahmoud Jega, we have elections in 2027 that is coming. But since last year, campaigns have started undermining the rules and regulations that should ordinarily guide, our elections. Under Mahmoud Jega, for instance, campaign financing, was not regulated. People spent money, so much money, that you start wondering that if our elections are for the highest bidder. So these are the issues that his successor will have to address so as to have, that confidence rebuilt in the Nigerian political system, particularly from the perspective of INEC and their contributions to free and fair elections and the emergence of rulers, of leaders, political leaders that actually reflect the votes of the people.
These are very valid issues. And when I listen to you speak, it then begs the question, Dr. Suleiman, would you say the issue is INEC as an institution or the political class? Because if you think about it, whether it is Mahmoud Jega, Mahmoud Yakubu, and whoever comes up next, do you think there will be any significant difference in the sense that it is the same institution, but it's different people, and it is the same behavior that we see in the political class? So the issue I'm wondering now for you, would you say it is INEC as an institution, perhaps its laws are not strict and stringent enough, or it is the political class whoever fits in that position of the chairman of INEC just automatically will be influenced by that class?
Well, it's about the people who man positions of responsibility. How patriotic they are, how godly and God-fearing they are, to the extent that they are able to resist the inducements that come their way. Because we know that in all political societies, whether it's in the US or in the UK or in France, in Nigeria, in Niger, politicians will always be politicians. They will behave in a manner that will ensure that they win elections. However, the difference across these nations is the extent to which those who have been mandated to ensure that elections are conducted under free and fair atmosphere adhere to their own rules, resist intimidation, resist inducement, resist all forms of machinations that politicians ordinarily, truly to their character, would want to, go by. To say that if you have not won elections, we are not going to allow that you have your way. To ensure that you have not met the processes for nominations. If parties submit names, you resist it. And we have seen inconsistencies in the time of Professor Mahmoud Jega, to the extent that people who didn't contest in primaries were allowed to run and win elections. The case of Ahmed Lawal of Yobe State is there. Somebody who didn't participate in the primaries, the name was substituted at the last minute. When elections have been conducted and concluded and names submitted, they substituted it and INEC accepted it. You go to some other places where governments are not in favor of some candidates, INEC will reject it and use the law as the defense for such decisions. So we saw a lot of inconsistent decisions under Mahmoud Jega. And to answer your question, it's not just about the institutions. Institutions are only given meaning by the people. So it is what the people who are occupying those positions do that makes it truly independent or not. If it is an independent National Electoral Commission, then it should not subject itself to the whims and caprices of politicians whom we know today that some of them do not even deserve to be primary school class monitors. By virtue of their character, there is no conscience, there is everything about some of them is criminality. Yet they find themselves to positions of power. And INEC has a responsibility to do the right thing so that we get the right people in positions of leadership for our country.
All right, Professor Barnabas, I have two questions for you. First will be that in in assessing the tenure of Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, we're also assessing the people who worked with him. And a good chunk, many of them will also leave next year before the 2027 general elections. Many will leave, almost immediately after he will have left in less than 60 days. So in assessing him and his people, are we also assessing professors and PhD holders from the ivory tower of Nigeria, from your own constituency, who, chair the bulk of those who are working with Professor Mahmoud Yakubu? Some of them have even, gone to jail for the infractions that they committed. So when we are saying that he was a failure in some aspect, are we also saying that just individuals who worked with him, including his good self, are failures, or the mere fact that they represent an institution that ought to be the, beacon of integrity in Nigeria, which is the ivory tower? I would love your thoughts on that. But I would also quickly put this in. When you said the other time that when you mark exams as a lecturer for people, what you judge is what is submitted to you and not the knowledge that the student exhibits in class. Do you think that that logic should apply to the courts in Nigeria, who, in the absence of electoral tribunals that has been proposed, the courts are the only institutions that can at least upturn what INEC will have done wrong? But then the court will also might want to use your own logic to say that we can only judge cases, electoral cases, based on the evidences that are submitted to us. So if you are claiming that, people felt disappointed, the person who should have won didn't win, but then you have a political party or a politician failing to prove that in court, who do we blame? Does it therefore mean that the courts are also complicit, or they are just using the logic that you use in marking the answer script of your students? Professor Barnabas.
Well, in terms of that, you must also know that law, to a very large extent, is subjective. When you mark scripts, it depends on the script that you are marking. If you are marking mathematics, the procedures, the arguments should be different from when you are marking, for instance, history or even political science, where there's a lot of subjectivity on the part of the lecturer compared to mathematics, where 1 + 1 anywhere in the world will amount to the same answer. What happens in the Nigerian political space, particularly as it relates to the judiciary, is proven,
beyond reasonable doubt,
situations where our judges, situations where our judges, give different judgments in similar cases, which now becomes, clear that there is a miscarriage of justice. That even the judges themselves, lawyers, have documented, so many cases where justice have been, judgments have been made without justice. Now, again, back to the question of whether or not it is what the judges see that they rule on. In this case, you go to a place like Imo State and look at the judgment, even the critique of the judgment by some judges, you will see clearly that we can't see justice, in that, this thing. So I understand what you're saying, that judges will always say that it is what they see. But what they are seeing, remember also that there's also the court of public opinion. And of course, they will have their way, because we have seen where situations where they've pronounced judgments that person who came fourth in an election became a governor. We have seen situations where people who won elections have even been removed And those who failed in that election have been brought in as House of Rep members, senators, and all. We leave them to God, because particularly at the Supreme Court, whatever they say, whether it is the case or not, we have nothing to do about it. So that I will not be able to say much. But in terms of the lecturers, professors who have been part of this electoral body, INEC, and we have seen how a lot of them have failed. Remember, there are so many people today who have found themselves into the lecturing profession that they have the competence in terms of this certificate, but the character is not there. And politicians also look out for these people that they know are easily manipulated, people you can manipulate, people who have no integrity, and they push them into these positions, either as recs or national commissioners and all. And it doesn't matter whether you are a professor, it doesn't matter whoever you are. If your character is questionable, if you have no honesty, if there's no integrity, if your pursuit is after money, after owning houses in Abuja and abroad, which politicians have reported to have, done for some of these people, then we say that they are part of the problem. It doesn't matter where they are coming from, whether they are coming from the religious organizations or from the academia. If their character, their actions, their activities do not portray patriotism, honesty, then we would put them in the same, categorization that they have contributed to the failures that we have seen in INEC, the failures that we have seen in our educational system, the failures that we have seen in the families, because these people that the Nigerian government, the society have actually considered as members of the intelligentsia, people who should ordinarily have conscience and operate by their own conscience. If they have failed, there's nothing we can say about it. And we know that if they don't face the judgment here, a time will come where they will have to answer for their actions before God.
Interesting, Prof, that you're bringing the spirituality into this. But very quickly, before we let you go, I would like to quickly ask you, the Constitution says that in appointing the chair of INEC, two things are important, experience and integrity. But other people are saying these days to say that why don't you add, courage to it, that a man who will be able to stand to the shenanigans and excesses of politicians is what Nigerians need. Who, therefore, will you be looking forward to as the next INEC chairman? Somebody from your constituency, like Professor Mahmoud and Professor Yakubu, or somebody from the judiciary? That's one. And then secondly, will the geopolitical zone of the successor to Professor Yakubu, will it matter, given that people are saying that there are only two geopolitical zones who have not produced INEC chair, the southwest of Nigeria and then the north central. If it comes from the southwest, people will say that's the constituency, that's the zone of the president. If it comes from north central, maybe that will balance the equation. Do you think that that will matter? And like I asked earlier, should he be a lecturer or a man of the law?
Well, anywhere the person comes from, whether from the academia or the judiciary, once the person, like you rightly said, is a person of courage, because we have seen now that intellectualism is not enough. For instance, what would you say of Professor Mahmoud Yakubu? A first-class intellectual by all standards. You can't, whether it's in Oxford or in Nigeria where he schooled, he has not come second in anything that he has done in terms of exams. But look at what has come to happen. So it's not about being a professor or not. If you are a professor with book, and you are not a professor with courage, you are not a professor with integrity, you are not a professor of patriotism, we should do away with you, because we have so many professors in Nigeria that are very good, but we also have those that have no integrity and who have no courage. We see now that the issue of courage is very important. And let me say this, that there are three, generally speaking, there are three models of electoral bodies. The first one is what you have as independent model. That's the one Nigeria practices. In fact, if you go to countries like France, what they practice is the governmental, I think France or Spain, they practice the governmental model, where INEC, the electoral body, is even a subset of the state. And yet, in such countries, people who man those positions still live true to their conscience. So the responsibility, first and foremost, is on those who appoint these INEC chairperson and others who work with him. You must appoint people that have track record of integrity. And it's not easy. It's not a difficult thing to find out. You go to their universities, you go to places where they have worked before. Let's see whether or not they have the reputation of being honest, of people of integrity. If they don't, then you don't have to bring them in. And in the context of where the person comes from, honestly, I do not think that even matters, because we have seen people who come from the places that have produced the chairpersons of INEC. It really wouldn't matter if the person is doing the right thing. If the president chooses to bring someone from the Southwest, and there are so many fine professors there, I wouldn't be calling him, but Professor Shoro Maikun, the former Vice Chancellor of Federal University of Oyo Ekiti, is a very good, good guy. A name is flying already.
That's an
Joash,
endorsement.
Professor Joash.
That's an endorsement from you right there.
No, not an endorsement. I'm only saying that.
I get your point, Prof.
Very unpleasant.
I get your point.
We have some good people. Even
Absolutely.
the name that we see flying everywhere,
Yeah.
Professor Joash, from North Central.
Correct.
He's a good guy. Very godly guy. So let us get the right people, and then once they get there, because some of them are very good now, but by the time they get to those positions, they start seeing dollars in their millions. They start seeing pounds in their thousands. Then you now start wondering, was this not this professor who would never accept bribe? Why was he in class?
Professor Barnabas.
Was this not this professor that was reputed for?
Yes. All right, Professor Barnabas, I'm afraid we really have to go.
All right, thank you very much.
Before we start seeing dollars, like the professors. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the morning show today. Thanks indeed.